Hi, I'm Claire Ridgway, founder of the Tudor Society and the Anne Boleyn Files. Now, one of my favourite historical attractions is Kenilworth Castle. It's right up there at the top of my list, along with places like Hever Castle, Hampton Court Palace, and I also love the beautiful ruined abbeys of Yorkshire. Now, I've been lucky enough to visit Kenilworth Castle on quite a few occasions over the years because I used to live right near it, but it never fails to move me. However many times I go, I get choked up visiting it. It just has such a major impact on me. It stops me in my tracks, and I browse around its ruins. I walk around them just wishing that I could go back to 1575, Queen Elizabeth's visit to the castle, and be a fly on the wall and perhaps not get too involved because it's slightly dangerous, going back in time to the Tudor courts. But yes, just to go back in time and watch the events unfold. Kenilworth Castle has a very long history. It dates back to the 12th century, but it's the castle's links to the famous Tudor family, the Dudleys, that I want to focus on today. In 1553, the castle was granted to John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, who was Lord President of the Council for the young Edward VI, who hadn't reached his majority. The stable block of Kenilworth Castle, which actually still stands today, was built by John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland. But unfortunately, John Dudley came to rather a bad end. He was executed as a traitor on the 22nd of August 1553 due to his support of Queen Jane, Lady Jane Grey, his daughter-in-law, who reigned for just 13 days before Mary I seized the throne. Kenilworth Castle became Crown property because the Duke of Northumberland had been executed as a traitor, and it remained in Crown property until 1563, when Queen Elizabeth I granted the castle to Northumberland's son, Robert Dudley, who'd be the future Earl of Leicester, who was Elizabeth's childhood friend, a man that she could always rely on throughout her life, a royal favourite, and a man she referred to as her eyes and her sweet Robin. Now, Queen Elizabeth I visited the castle on 4 occasions that we know about, between 1563 and 1575. She stayed at the castle as part of her royal progresses, but it was her final visit in July 1575 that Leicester went all out to impress the Queen on this visit. He went all out to woo the Queen, and it was actually a visit that would last 19 days, which is a long time for a monarch to spend at one of her courtiers' properties. It's actually the longest stay at a courtier's house in any of Elizabeth's royal progresses. Now, it's a visit that we actually know quite a lot about, and that's because Robert Langham, or Langham, it's spelled both ways in the primary sources, a member of Dudley's household, recorded her visit, all the details, in a letter entitled "The Magnificent Pageants Presented Before Queen Elizabeth at Kenilworth Castle in 1575. And also poet and actor George Gascoigne, a man hired by Robert Dudley to provide the sort of court entertainments during the royal visit. He also wrote an account. So thanks to those accounts, we've got a lot of details about this 1575 visit. But what exactly did Leicester do to impress the Queen on this visit? Well, his plans and improvements included luxury accommodation for the Queen and her staff. Now, a new 4-storey block of apartments known as Leicester's Building had been built between 1571 and 1572 and used by the Queen on her 1572 royal progress. But it wasn't good enough that these were new apartments. For her 1575 visit, they were improved further, they were reformed further. English Heritage, who own Kenilworth Castle, describe this building as having been one of the most spectacular works of architecture in the country, boasting enormous glass windows and all the luxury and elegance that a queen might command. So it was obviously an imposing block of apartments, and these were royal apartments. These were just for the Queen to use and her staff. So it obviously was very, very lavish. Then we have Leicester's Gatehouse. Now this gatehouse still stands today. The apartments, the luxury accommodation is all in ruins, but the gatehouse still stands today and you can go into it and visit the different rooms in it. That was built in 1571-2, and it was the aim of the building of it was to give the castle a grand entrance from the church in the Coventry Road. So it was supposed to be, you know, this spectacular entrance. Then there are the pleasure grounds. These were improvements made to the castle grounds, which included the creation of the Chase, which was a hunting ground of about 320 hectares or 800 acres. And it wasn't just sort of, made, it was also well stocked with game and deer for the Queen and her party to go out and hunt. So they would definitely manage to hunt something down. The mere around the castle also was well stocked with wildfowl for hunting. A bridge was built. It was 183 metres and it was built over the mere to connect the Chase and the Gatehouse for ease of access. There was also a viewing platform erected over the mere so that the views could be taken in because it's wonderful, beautiful countryside. Even today, with the way that England has become more built up around Kenilworth Castle, you can still look out the view and really think that you're Queen Elizabeth taking in the views. Leicester also planted tall and fragrant trees. He ordered the creation of shady arbours, walks and seats so that the Queen could go out into the gardens and the landscape around Kenilworth Castle and just enjoy all these beautiful plants and fragrances and enjoy the views. A lavish firework display was held at the castle across the mere so that the Queen could watch it. There was also a play apparently featuring Triton riding an 18-foot-long mermaid and moving islands, apparently carrying the Lady of the Lake and her nymphs. So that sounds quite an amazing pageant. The Tudors went all out for their pageants. They had moving parts and all sorts, so that sounds incredible. And as I say, George Gascoigne, the poet, was in charge of the sort of courtly entertainment. And Leicester also commissioned him to write a masque, especially for the Queen, to be performed for her. Gascoigne wrote a masque called Zabetta, and historian Susan Doran points out in her book Monarchy and Matrimony, the Courtships of Elizabeth I, that the story of the masque concerned Zabetta, clearly a truncated version of the name Elizabeth, who'd been lost to Diana, the goddess of chastity, for near 17 years past, the number of years since Elizabeth's accession, and during this time had resisted the entreaties of Juno, the goddess of marriage, that she marry. Juno found Sabetta, who was then restored to Diana, and a debate ensued about whether the nymph should continue in her chastity. The masque ended with the goddess Iris extolling the virtues of marriage in a direct appeal to the Queen. Now, that's not very subtle, is it? We know that Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, and the Queen were very close, and there's the did they or didn't they, did they have this romantic and perhaps sexual relationship, and we know how close they were. And you kind of think of this masque, that's just not very subtle, is it at all? Now, unfortunately, this masque was never performed in front of the Queen. It was cancelled due to inclement weather. There was storms, wind and rain. But Dudley Leicester wasn't letting this, stop him. What actually happened was George Gascoigne, who, had written the masque, he ended up running alongside the Queen as she was leaving the castle, telling her the story of his masque as a kind of farewell kind of performance. Susan Doran writes of how Gascoigne told Elizabeth about the virgin nymph Zabetta, who'd rejected all of her suitors, and when she rejected them, she didn't just reject them, she turned them into the trees and rocks that the Queen could see around her here at Kenilworth Castle, and how she turned one of them, Deep Desire, into a holly bush with pricks to prove the restless pricks of his private thoughts. And as Elizabeth went past the holly bush on her way out of the castle, an actor, Deep Desire, spoke to her, telling of his love for Zabetta and pleading with the Queen to stay at Kenilworth. He said, "Live here, good Queen, live here. You're amongst your friends. Their comfort comes when you approach, and when you part, it ends." Now, obviously, the virgin nymph Zabetta was Elizabeth. The near 17 years all corresponds with Elizabeth, coming to the throne and staying this virgin queen. And Deep Desire was obviously meant to be Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. And Susan Doran says that the pricks of the holly bush symbolised his undiminished sexual desires. So after all this time, and they've been childhood friends, and that he still wants his Queen. He wants to marry her. Now, this shortened performance was not successful. Queen Elizabeth, went on her way. But I always wonder what would have happened if the weather had stayed lovely and dry. What would have happened if the Queen had actually seen the whole performance? Would it have changed things? Would it have changed history? Who knows? It's one of those what ifs, isn't it? Now, I've told you all about the building work that Leicester had done for the visit, and also the creation of the chase and stocking of animals and that. But Leicester also ordered a privy garden to be designed and created for Queen Elizabeth, a garden that was to be private for the Queen. Only the Queen was supposed to go in it. It was for her own private use. But Robert Langham was actually able to get into the garden to visit it while the Queen was out hunting one day. And his description in his letter has allowed English Heritage to recreate the garden for visitors today, and it really is beautiful. Features of the garden created for Elizabeth include a terrace. This terrace led from the loggia and gave a superb view over the garden. It was and is today lined with a balustrade decorated with obelisks, spheres and Dudley's emblem, the bear and the ragged staff. Another feature, arbours. Langham wrote of how 2 arbours, perfumed by sweet trees and flowers, were placed at each end of the terrace. Then we have plants. Now, Langham doesn't go into detail on the plants that were used in the garden. He just mentions the sweetness of savour on all sides, fragrant herbs and flowers, and fruit trees bedecked with apples, pears and ripe cherries. So English Heritage, what they did, they based their choice on other contemporary evidence, such as documents and tapestries, to see what flowers and plants were popular in the Elizabethan period. The traditional knot pattern has been used along with popular plants and flowers, and also traditional English fruit trees. And then there's the marble fountain. Now this is the centrepiece of the garden, and it's made from white Carrara marble from Tuscany, Italy, just like the original. It features two men, or Atlantes, which Robert Langham described as one looking east, the other west, and they were described as supporting a ball, a sphere, which has been recreated by English Heritage. And the sphere is topped with Dudley's bear and ragged staff emblem. And there are 8 panels at the bottom of the fountain, and they feature scenes from Ovid's Metamorphoses. And then we have the aviary. Langham described it as a square cage, sumptuous and beautiful, joined hard to the north wall. And he wrote of how its cornice was painted like it was decorated with precious stones. He said, beautified with great diamonds, emeralds, rubies and sapphires, pointed, tabled, rock and round, and garnished with gold. And he said that it was replenished with lively birds, English, French, Spanish, Canarian, and I'm deceived if I saw not some African, whereby whether it became more delightsome in change of tunes and harmony to the ear, or else in difference of colours, kinds, and properties to the eye. So he's saying there, that it's a beautiful aviary, it's garnished with gold, it's decorated, it's made to look like it's decorated with precious stones, and it's full of birds from lots of different countries and that have lots of different tunes and harmonies, lots of different bird song, lots of colours as well, so it's easy on the eye and easy on the ear. And so you can just imagine Queen Elizabeth walking round this private garden and just being delighted not only by the plants and the fountain and the fragrances, but also the bird song and the colours of these birds that come from all over the place. Now, all of this work that was done by Leicester, well, perhaps not done with his own hands, but commissioned by Leicester, was a last-ditch attempt by him to win the Queen's hand in marriage. And it just seems so sad that it failed. Susan Doran points out that just a few weeks later at Woodstock in September 1575, entertainment prepared by Leicester again included a story of 2 lovers, a princess and a knight, who, as Doran explains, were forced to part for reasons of state. And perhaps, you can read into this, perhaps this was Leicester showing his acceptance of the situation, that he'd been rejected because of reasons of state, because Elizabeth had very good reasons for not entering into marriage with him. So perhaps, he realises he was rejected and he's saying, I accept it. Now, Elizabeth never married. She chose to be married to England instead, to her realm, to the country that she governed. But 3 years later, Leicester married widow Lettice Devereux, who was Elizabeth's first cousin once removed, and actually looked very similar to Elizabeth, we are led to believe, although perhaps she was just, in her portraits, perhaps she was just, styling herself on Elizabeth because it was very popular to try and look like the Queen. Now, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, died in 1588. And Elizabeth was truly devastated. She locked herself away in her private chambers for days, and she refused to speak to anyone. She was truly grief-stricken, and in the end, her counsellors had to break her door down, and even then she was upset, and it was hard to get anything done. 2 months later, she was described as much aged and spent and very melancholy. So Leicester's death obviously had this major impact on her. She also kept the last letter that he wrote to her before his death in a box at her bedside, and she labelled it his last letter. So that is evidence that Leicester was very special to her. I believe that Leicester was her true love, and vice versa as well. Every time I go to Kenilworth and I walk around the haunting ruins of the apartments that Leicester built for Elizabeth and enjoy the beautiful garden there, I get rather choked up, I get rather emotional. Now, for me, and I am a complete soppy romantic, I feel that Kenilworth Castle stands as a testament to a love that sadly had to be sacrificed. I think that Elizabeth truly loved Dudley, but that she couldn't marry him. She had to put her country first, and she had to stay this virgin queen. Now, I'm very, very excited about visiting Kenilworth Castle again. It's one of my favourite historical attractions, and I'm really excited about going again with the Discover the Tudors tour, because I haven't been there since there's been some changes. English Heritage has actually added stairs and platforms to the ruins of the Leicester building, the apartments, the ruins of the apartments where Elizabeth stayed, her private apartments. This building, or the ruins of the building, it was a shell before, and visitors could only sort of look around it at basement level, and you're sort of craning your neck to try and see the architectural features. But now visitors can climb up to 18 metres in height to what would have been Elizabeth's private chambers, her bedroom and long gallery, to view not only the architecture, where the fireplaces were, where the windows were, things that you just couldn't see before, but also to enjoy the views that Elizabeth would have enjoyed, to look out over the parkland, to look out over the mere. And looking out, I don't think that the landscape round there has changed much in over 400 years. So you can really put yourself in Elizabeth's shoes as you look out over the landscape. Now, I hate heights. I don't like heights at all, but nothing is going to stop me from climbing those stairs, even if I have to hang on to someone for dear life, or perhaps hang on to the wall, just touching the wall as I go. But nothing is going to stop me climbing up those stairs to the viewing platforms, because I really, really want to be in Elizabeth's shoes. So, Kenilworth Castle, I can't wait to visit it again.